Hi everyone, welcome to TriEssence martial art channel, episode 2 of Fulosophy, where we're going to discuss the limitation to physics, to Chinese martial art, and to our understanding in general. Now before we start, I'd just like to say that a second wave of COVID-19 is sweeping around the globe. So if your country is not COVID-free, then I urge you to be careful again, put on your mask. Well, you should never have taken the mask off when you go outside, but I do see a lot of people, at least in South Africa, and I've heard from overseas friends that a lot of people are becoming careless and they're not wearing masks in public, and this pretty much contributed to the second wave. So, I would suggest everyone that's watching my channel to still stay safe and don't let your guards down. Right, the threat is not over yet. It's not over until either the virus is completely gone or that we have a working vaccination. So everyone, still keep safe and keep your guards up at all times. Protect yourself at all times, just like the bosses would say. Right, so in my last two videos, I basically talked about the magic of boson, right? Where, if you forgot, I quoted Arthur C. Clarke that any sufficient technology will be indistinguishable from magic. So a lot of the stuff that you see in internal Chinese martial arts that looks beyond your understanding, where people like to chop it up to cheap power, are actually just physics or biomechanics that you don't understand. And a lot of times these instructors also not doing a service to the community by hiding the real mechanic behind it and parade it around as some kind of miracle power. And I think in the long run that is bad for the Chinese martial art community. And in particular, I analyzed the video of this martial man interviewing a Tai Chi master called Adam Misner, and that video has upset quite a few people as far as I can see, which is quite strange because I believe out of all the non-fanboys to Adam Misner, and obviously his fanboys are gonna praise him like the best master ever, but out of all the non-fanboys, and I believe he's the most fair review compared to some of the other people who really hate him and just think he's 100% fraud and fake. Where I said he does have real skill, but he's misrepresenting his skill with behind magic power. So I don't even know why his fanboys are upset with me. I'm actually the fair one here compared to all the actual haters of him. Anyway, so this episode of Philosophy, we're gonna wrap up this whole topic by just talking about one last argument that often people would present when I try to explain to them that martial art cannot exceed physics, okay? And that argument is that physics is not everything. This statement on its own is true, okay? Physics at this moment does not understand everything. There's a lot in this universe that the physics, the mathematics, and the physicians and the scientists can't really explain properly. So that statement is true. However, these people who are arguing for chi power, they're misappropriating this type of understanding to science, okay? Sure, physics is not everything yet. We still have a lot of limitation to our understanding, a lot of things that we don't yet understand. However, we need to really look at where does Chinese martial art, and in particular internal martial art, fall in the boundary of physics. Does it fall in the realm of things that we don't yet understand? Is it dark matter, dark energy, singularity, or does it fall into the realm of physics that we already know pretty well of? Right? That's something that often people don't think about when they're trying to make this argument. And one of the derivative of this argument would be that science has been proven wrong from time to time. For example, back in the old days, Newtonian physics, right, the Newtonian laws of physics are seen as the truth, but then in the early 1900s, Einstein came along and disproved Newton with his theories of relativity. And therefore, what can't be explained by physics today, aka these chi powers of these chi masters, are just physics that we can not yet explain. Now, I've heard people say this a lot, and I'm ashamed to say that I personally have made this argument against other people too in the past, before I actually looked into physics, okay? But obviously, I personally have an inquisitive nature, and I'm very critical about things. So I like to figure out the truth behind everything, and even if those truths contradict my previous belief, I'm willing to let go of that belief in pursuit of the better truth, okay, or the truth that I can understand as far as I can understand. So after I look into physics, which I doubt any of these guys who's making the same argument has actually looked into, I've discovered something completely different. So by hearing this statement that Einstein has disproved Newtonian physics, if you don't really know what's going on, you would think that okay, that means someone came along later in history and proved that the Newton's three laws of force and Newton's gravitational law, they are not correct, right? So therefore, what we understand today can be disproven in 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, and maybe that new law will include chi power. However, okay, Einstein didn't actually completely throw the Newtonian law or equations out of the window. Okay, what he actually did was made it more complete, or make alteration or addition to the already existing Newtonian law. It wasn't like Newton was completely wrong and this is a completely new theory. No, if you actually compare the Newtonian equation to the Einstein's equation, they have similarities. Okay, if you take away, for example, in Einstein's special relativity, if you take away gamma, the equation of gamma, then the Einstein's special relativity equation is just the same as Newtonian equation. So it's the same equation with a new element added called gamma. So just to illustrate my point, let's take an equation from the Lorentz transformation from special relativity, where x prime equals gamma times x minus velocity times time. Alright, so I'm not going to bore you with the details of the equation. If you're interested in that, look at the science channel. But the point is, gamma is basically the new value or variable equation that Einstein has added from his special relativity. If you take gamma out, this is just a Newtonian equation. Okay, so basically this is evidence of the fact that Einstein did not throw Newtonian equation out the window. He simply improved it to make it more accurate. So science doesn't completely throw its predecessors out the window. Okay, Newton wasn't completely wrong. He just didn't have the complete truth. And the fact that Einstein discovered gamma, which basically compensates for space-time, well, for space contraction and time dilation, it doesn't actually change a lot of the stuff that affect our lives from day to day. Okay, so basically what this entails is that Newtonian physics doesn't account for objects that travels near the speed of light. And the reason it doesn't account for that is because back in the days with Newton, no one has ever seen an object travel close to the speed of light, excluding light, of course. And even now that we know about this equation, how many things in your life that you know of and interact with or sees every day, other than light itself, travel near the speed of light? I can't think of any in my life. I mean, a plasma TV, that is light, light bulb, that is light, but anything that is not light, at the moment we don't have the technology for anything to travel near the speed of light. And when something travels in an everyday, regular, mundane, slow speed, the value of gamma is almost zero. So it doesn't actually change the outcome of the equation by much. So even though Einstein has discovered this new thing of gamma and the fact that time dilate and space contract when you travel near the speed of light, it doesn't really change our everyday life. Okay, if we look at physics interaction of forces of our daily life with these cars, us human moving, even if you look at planets, right? All the planets that's around Earth, like Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, they all fit. You can all calculate their trajectory and their path precisely with Newtonian physics. You don't need Einstein's equations. Okay, the only problem that people start to encounter is when they actually try to predict the trajectory of Mercury, because Mercury is very close to the Sun, and therefore it experiences a huge gravitational force, right? So this is the special relativity where we talk about objects that travel near the speed of light, and in general relativity, it accounts for gravity that is larger than normal, right? Larger than what Newton was able to observe in his days, i.e., out of all the 8 planets, only Mercury, the one that's closer to the Sun, are incorrectly predicted according to Newtonian law. and that is basically what is accounted for when you use general relativity. So, just in case you guys don't know this, generally when the planets orbit around the sun, they have an eclipse, and you keep that same eclipse over and over and over. The problem with Mercury is that the eclipse actually rotates, so it will travel like this, then like that, and then like this, and then like that. So the paths keep rotating, right? I think in science they call it the precession. So this only happens to Mercury because Mercury is close to the sun, which means general relativity only really kicks in when the gravitational force is larger than normal. So whether it is close to the sun or whether it's close to a black hole, that's where Newtonian physics fails, and where general relativity comes in. So what does this mean for martial arts? Absolutely nothing, because if you are a human like me, you are not going to travel near the speed of light, right? Not even near. We can't even travel half the speed of light. We're very, very far from that. So special relativity means nothing to martial arts. And we don't have a mass that can compete with the sun. So therefore, general relativity means nothing to us. So what does Einstein's discovery have to do with Chinese martial arts or martial arts in general? Absolutely nothing. Which is why this line of arguments that Einstein disproved Newton, therefore there are more things we don't understand yet, which could explain chi power, is most likely not true. I'm not going to say 100% not true, but it's pretty much 99.999% not true. And people who use this argument just simply don't understand what actually did Einstein do versus what Newton had. And now the next argument, a derivative of the same argument that people like to make, is that what about quantum mechanics? Right? Quantum mechanics surely throw classical physics off his feet and onto his face, and therefore maybe chi power can be explained by quantum mechanics. Now, I do admit that quantum mechanics is a very weird thing, right? Even the people who discover quantum mechanics, people who study quantum mechanics, say this, right? There was a famous guy who said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, then you don't understand quantum mechanics. So you can, and Einstein described it as some kind of spooky phenomenon. So yes, quantum mechanics is very strange and weird and complicated. However, right, all the things that we know about quantum mechanics, for example, quantum tunneling, delocalization, quantum entanglement, all these weird properties only happens on a quantum level, right? What that means is that a particle could disappear here and appear there, quantum tunneling. A particle could be entangled, and when they're separated, have an effect on each other. Or a particle can exist in multiple possibility locations at the same time, called delocalization, and when you measure it, it appears in one of those locations, but not all of it. But before you measure it, you can't actually tell exactly where that particle is. So these properties are true on a quantum level. But have you ever seen your table teleport to another location? Have you ever seen your car teleport to another location? Have you ever seen any of these quantum phenomena in our everyday life? You haven't. Why? Because quantum mechanics, the effect of quantum mechanics, doesn't affect on a large scale of things, which is us, right? Humans and the object we interact with daily. It only happens on a quantum level. Now, I do admit that quantum mechanics is very complicated and there's many things I don't understand yet. But from what I can gather, at least at this very moment, there's no evidence that a table can quantum tunnel or delocalize or be entangled, right? So again, it does not apply to martial arts. Now, I've heard people who want to say, quantum mechanics supposedly proves that mind over matter because an observer changes the delocalized state of a particle. And unfortunately, that has been disproven as well. I do wish that were true. It would be great if we have some scientific proof to mind over matter. It will make the world more interesting. So that's something I actually personally would want to be true, but it is not. And because it is not, we can't pretend like it is, right? So basically, scientists have done experiments to prove that it's not our observation that changes the state of a particle from a wave function into a localized particle. It's the act of measuring. So even if we measure it with a machine, without the presence of our consciousness, it can still be measured, right? So obviously there's still debate on whether or not our consciousness is affected, but so far the general opinion is that the consciousness has nothing to do with it. It's just a simple act of measurement, and some even go as far as saying that the the way we understand particle is wrong. It's always been a wave. It's never been a particle. So we're not going to go into that because that is quantum mechanics. But the point is you can't use that to prove chi power, right? When a master does no touch and sends somebody falling back or does unbelievable stuff that looks like telekinesis, that is not quantum mechanic. Because what we understand of quantum mechanics can only affect things on a quantum level. It does not translate into a regular sized world. So people who use that kind of argument simply never actually looked into quantum mechanics to see what it's all about. They only heard bits and pieces of theories that confirm their understanding, right? So basically it's confirmation bias. They believe something, they heard a piece of quantum theory that fits their understanding, then they say, quantum theory proves my understanding. But it doesn't if you look at the whole picture. So the conclusion to this is that while science has its limitations of understanding, there are many things we don't understand. Dark energy, dark matter, black hole, singularity, stuff related to quantum mechanics, there are many things we don't understand. But none of those things will affect our understanding to Chinese martial art. And I will say that there are also things that people don't quite yet understand about internal martial art. And that's simply because the majority of the scientific researchers, they're not spending time to research Chinese martial art. One, because there's not a lot of legit practitioners that can be used for the subject of study. And second level, you probably won't get tenure for studying Chinese martial art, right? They have to get tenure to get paid, and therefore they need to study something that people are willing to pay them money to study. And Chinese martial art is not one of those popular topics. So I do admit that there are things that science don't yet understand. But whatever it is that internal martial art does, like what I've shown in my previous videos on magic of song, as well as the debunking video on chi power, all those phenomena that you see I replicate and as well as you see other masters do, none of those things break the known laws of physics of today. Okay, I'm not talking about the law of physics in 100 years' time or when string theory is proven or whatever else in the future. I'm talking about today. None of those phenomena should and could break the current known laws of physics. So any explanation, aka chi power, mind over matter, that try to explain those phenomena are most likely false. Now, if you are still not convinced, then let's look into it. For example, when the master holds out his hand without touching the student bounces back or falls over or do all kind of stuff, or the master very likely just touch the student stop bouncing around and etc. You got to ask yourself, okay, if this is true, what force is actually happening? I mean, in science we know there are 4 forces, right? There is the strong force, the weak force, electromagnetic force, and gravity. Now, strong force and weak force both happens on the nuclear level, so on the atomic level, right, is what holds the particles together and what allow particles to pass electrons to each other, for radiation decay, all of that stuff. So those things doesn't travel through a long distance, and by long distance I mean any distance that's bigger than an atom, right? They basically the atom nuclei, very very tiny scale. I can't even show you how tiny it is. Those two, the strong and the weak force, only happens and have effect at that tiny scale. It does not transfer through space. It does not have an effect over a space larger than an atom. So for those of you that might not know, the strong force is what holds the proton and the neutrons together. Okay, so it only affects neutrons and protons at that tiny space. I mean, if that force is any bigger, it will pull other neutrons and protons together, but it doesn't do that. It only functions within that tiny little space. And the weak force is basically what functions around the electrons that's found around the nuclei. And again, it only functions when 2 atoms collide with one another. Then the weak force happens between the electrons. Again, it does not have any effect on any space larger than that. And electromagnetic force, well, if the chi mass is actually an electromagnetic force, then they should be affecting the metals around him, right? I mean, do you see any Taiji master that can suck up spoons or pull a metal object from a distance? No. I know there are stories about people who are born with electromagnetic powers that can stick spoon to their body. I have not looked into that personally, so I'm not going to comment on that. But now these Taiji or Chi masters are able to replicate that result, which means what they are using is definitely not electromagnetic force. And the last force that's left is gravity. And sure, gravity is the one force that can permeate through space and time over a long distance. But we also understand that gravity is proportional to mass. Okay, the larger an object, the more gravitational force it has. So yes, while us humans also have gravitational force, just like every other object that we can see, it is very, very weak. Okay, so for you to be able to make a student bounce up, you'll be able to generate enough gravitational force that can temporarily displace the gravity of Earth. And that is a lot of force that gravity that you need to generate. I mean, we can basically counter gravity by propulsion, jet propulsion, and various other kind of mechanics that generate energy. But if you're talking about pure gravity from mass, or human mass is not capable of generating enough gravity to pull or push somebody without touching them. So that's just simply not possible. And if it is gravitational force, then it should be relatively easy to be measured in a scientific lab, right? If any of these chi masters will just simply offer themselves to be tested for the greater good, then we can solve this mystery for once and for all. But why don't they ever offer that? It's because they know once they do that, their magic will be dispelled and people will see the reality behind it. And that's most likely why they don't want to do this, okay? So if it's any of these four forces, well, it can't be strong force, it can't be a weak force, it can be electromagnetic in terms of that force does affect object in the distance, and gravity. But these two, electromagnetic and gravity, can be measured easily with science. And I'm pretty sure that if a chi master ever go into a lab, they're not going to be able to measure these forces. Obviously, the other argument that people are going to say is that maybe we don't have the correct tools to measure it. Well, if it is these four known forces, then we do have the correct tools. They have been studied for a very long time. I don't have the exact dates, but probably over 100 years. So they are not new to us. Okay, this is not dark matter, or dark energy, or singularity. These are well-known things in classical physics. So if you think that science can't measure the gravitational or magnetic force generated by a human, then yeah, I don't know what planet you are living on. Now the next argument that people can have is that maybe it's a different force, a new force that science don't know of. Well, this can be possible, but it's very unlikely to be true. Okay, because in modern science, the level of observation that these scientists and physicists have is pretty amazing, right? If you don't look into it, you wouldn't know. I'm not going to go into detail here, but I'll just say that they are pretty amazing at what kind of measurement they can have. They can measure event on a quantum level, right? Which is super macroscopic. We think about like nanometers, like nano measurements. Then I don't see how they can't measure another force that clearly can pull a person off the ground and send them flying back or fall back or do funny stuff. A force that can affect a grown man, right, which is at least 60 to 100 kilo. I don't see how they can't measure that force. Okay, so that means they can measure things as large, as far away as gravitational waves. They could measure things like cosmic microwave background radiation, and they can measure things that are small as a neutrino that hardly even interact with any known matter. And just a few years ago, they've made discovery on the Higgs boson particle, which is a particle that gives mass to everything that we see in the universe. And I don't see how a force like this exists in our everyday life, but no scientists throughout history have ever encountered it and picked it up. You have to know that scientists do this for a living. They measure forces for a living, at least some of them. So for this force to exist and no one have ever found it, it's just very, very unlikely to be true. So while it is a very slim possibility that there could be another force, but I personally think the chance of that happening is almost impossible, alright? And if that's not convincing enough, let's talk about physical experience and empirical evidence. So, obviously the argument that people have against that is, you've never met my master, and my master definitely have the real chi power. Whatever you say you experience or seen or replicated is not the same as what we do, right? That is basically the kind of mentality that these fanboys have. When I had the video where I replicate the stuff that Adam Messner demonstrated, basically, people who are his fans are basically saying, I'm doing something else, but he's doing the actual chi power, even though we can have similar or identical results, but we're not doing the same thing. Now these people are like flat earthers, right? Even if you give them the empirical evidence that Earth is round, they are going to refuse it. So you can't wake up someone who is pretending to be asleep and don't want to be awake, right? So they are basically a lost cause. However, I'm making videos for people who are on the fence about which side is correct. I'm not trying to convince the fanboys. I know they are lost, of course, and they will never be convinced. But I'm trying to, indicate the others who not sure which side the apple should fall. Right? So for those of you out there, I'm going to share my personal experience. So many years ago, right? I would say around 2007. I was also one of the chi believers because I've seen videos of Marxists doing chi stuff, and back then I was more naive than today, and I think well, if these Marxists are doing it, then it must be real. And especially, people often would say that these students are faking it, but I had this understanding that why would the student fake this on purpose? He's trying to learn something from the master. If you know the master is fake, why would he stay with the master? So at least to the student, whatever the master is demonstrating, it must be real, right? These masters are not paying the student a salary to be an actor for them in demos. These students are doing it voluntarily. Some of them are actually paying the master a huge fortune of money to learn this type of power. So if they know it's fake, they are not going to keep doing this. So I had that logic understanding of the situation. So I thought to myself, these masters must be real. And also back then, I didn't really understand science as much as I am today. So I think there must be another force that science haven't really found that must be what these people are using. So I thought about that so much that I actually got up and took a trip back to China. And during that trip is in 2008, around the time where Olympic was actually happening in Beijing. I went around Beijing looking for chi masters, and I found some of them, right? The first one I was able to find, and that's actually in fact the video that made me decide to go back to Beijing and find this kind of power, is an old Bagua master called Tian Fang. The video I watched, he was 94 years old, and when I went to Beijing, he was 96 years old. Now go ahead and just play a small portion of that video that actually got me to go back to China and look for chi masters.